Welcome back to Bazaar. I'm Miko and a huge patch has hit. I'm going to start with the official patch notes. There's some fairly major changes that are not item or skill related that are by far the most important changes in this patch. First up, all heroes starting health increased by 50, so now everyone has 300 starting health except for Pyg, who has 350, and I think this is generally just a very good change for the game. It gives them more room to play with in terms of the difficulty of early game enemies. Stuff like Warrior, which was out of line previously, will be much closer to manageable now than it previously was. Additionally, this is going to help deal with the early game power of stuff like Weapon Vanessa. Anything where you can run out of ammo or your opponents are given more time to scale up their defenses or offenses is going to make Weapon Vanessa and that sort of aggro build early weaker. And this is a good change for making those builds, which are the best builds in the early game, weaker. So I appreciate this a lot. However, I do not think that Weapon Vanessa is going to be nerfed this patch. In fact, I think it's going to be even stronger than it was, because despite the fact the first couple days that health buff is going to matter a lot, experience is being vastly reworked. Previously, Mountain Pass started spawning on day 2. I believe Study did as well. Mountain Pass now only spawns day 4 to 7. I believe this is a typo and either starts spawning on day 3 or it no longer spawns on day 2 or day 3. But either way, the intent is the same. Mountain Pass and Study do not appear until day 4. Next up on the experience hit list, Tiny Furry Monster no longer gives experience at all, but now gives a choice of 2 skills for that unlockable option, which is actually much more interesting in my opinion. I think that's a much better design. Generally, pushing experience up, number gets higher, you eventually, every breakpoint of 8, get more options, whether that's upgrades or skills or what have you. But the main thing that pushing experience does is give you more health, or get you to certain breakpoints like level 10 one day earlier. So a choice of 2 skills is a much more interesting thing to do than pushing experience up. I still think this is a great event, just for more interesting reasons than it used to be. And that's not the full extent of experience changes, because they completely reworked monster rewards. I believe these gold values are the same as they used to, just with legendary monsters being down a gold. However, gold monsters are still only worth 2 XP. Stuff like Warrior might be a lot easier to fight with 50 more starting health, but Warrior is only worth 1 extra gold. You don't have to fight Warrior anymore. Likewise, there are no diamond enemies before day 4. Day 3's enemies, Scout Trooper and Aetherite, are only gold tier enemies, meaning you cannot get extra experience from Mountain Pass, Study, Tiny Furry Monster, or gold monsters before day 4. What does that mean? It means that you have to fight day 1 with a 4-size board, day 2 with a 6-size board, and day 3 with an 8-size board. You cannot skip these things anymore. You have to care about that portion of the game much more than you used to, and I think that's a good change for a couple of reasons. One, the early game should exist. You shouldn't be able to level up ahead of time and skip one of those board stages. I think that's probably not the design intention, and it's probably better for the health of the game. But it's massively better for the new player experience. Anyone who's used the Reddit for any period of time has seen a confused new player asking why their opponents were clearly on future days. And they've asked this because there'd be like a 4,000 to 8,000 health gap on day 12 on the same hero, because the opponent just got 3 levels up on them. Or it was like day 2 and they had 6 items, their opponent had 8 items, and you're not supposed to have that till the next day. And that might be a silly new player mistake in the eyes of a veteran, but the reality is it's a negative thing that happens to a whole hell of a lot more new players than just the ones that post about it on the forum. So I think for the health of the game, changing it so that you cannot out-level them in the early game and the amount you can out-level them by in the late game is lower is definitely a positive change. Additionally, diamond monsters and legendary monsters both only give 3 experience now. And I really appreciate this change, because something that was beginning to grate on me is how important experience RNG was over the course of a run. You could have the run, basically the exact same RNG except for which monsters you're allowed to fight, and on one run, you are not able to fight your rightmost monsters, right? You're getting Lich, you're getting Radiant Corsair, you're getting these monstrously hard enemies that just no build can beat, most of the time. And you're being forced to take 2 experience fights. Compare that to the same run, but you're getting like Scoville and 4 experience diamond fights that you can reliably beat. By the end of day 12, monster RNG alone could result in you being up or down an entire level. And this really helps to level that out. I'm a really big fan of removing RNG from the game. So even though this is designed with a different intention, it also lessens the volatility of how much monster RNG can impact your final level, and as a direct result, your odds of winning in the late game. Tempo's been making changes towards lowering experience bit by bit. This is one of the biggest, probably the biggest lump sum of changes in one patch to lower the experience curve, and I think it's needed. I think that like every time they do this piecemeal, the parts that are left over become that much more important. I think this is a good change, and it needed to be this big to accomplish its goal. I will say stuff like getting the experience option at the docks on Vanessa accessed, or stuff like going to Bazaar since that's still in the game, become disproportionately more important, right? Like anytime you see Deadly Duel in the late game, you're clicking it now automatically, don't even bother looking at the other two. And that's just because there are so few methods for getting experience that everything that's left is that much more important. But having said that, I think this is still probably good for the long-term health of the game because it's better for new players. It also replaces some of the options for experience, the more interesting choices, lessens volatility by making which monster fights you have access to less important. On the whole, I just think this is a fantastic change. I was torn on it initially because I don't view experience min-maxing as a necessarily problematic part of the game, but the more I thought about it, the more I wholeheartedly agree with this set of changes. Now that said, there are two more changes. A hex is temporarily disabled, not a big deal. Don't know why, doesn't really matter to me. However, the starting enchanted item has been buffed because it can no longer spawn radiant items. I'm of two minds on this opinion. First opinion, objectively good change, great change, enchanted item needed the buffs, radiant starting items sucked, obviously great for the game. But my second opinion is, doesn't this really just highlight that the radiant enchant is in a broken, useless spot right now, and that the radiant enchant as a whole is a problem? Because frankly, if this had been labeled differently, if this had just been radiant enchant temporarily disabled pending rework, I'd have been much more excited. Because no one clicks random enchant, gets radiant, and expresses joy, right? It's just a bad enchant in its current situation, with the one exception of if you're playing an absolutely cracked one weapon build on Vanessa, then it can be okay. But generally speaking, radiant enchant just exists to make the enchant pool worse, and it sucks. I don't like the way it works right now, and the reason this is a good change is a symptom of radiant being in a bad spot. For the rest of this, I'm going to come over to howbazaar.gg. I really appreciate the full patch notes. They show us things that are not item and skill changes. They show us design intent for some things sometimes. However, for the purpose of you, the viewer, howbazaar.gg has better user interface because it shows exactly what it used to be, what it is now. For items that are more complicated, I can hover this and show you exactly what they used to be, just better user interface. So switching over to howbazaar.gg for all of the remaining changes, Proboscis had its heavy enchant removed. This is just a good thing. If it worked, it would be a self-infinite combo that was broken, but it didn't work, so it was just an enchant that did nothing. It was left over from when it was an active item. Good change. For any other bug fixes, I won't really be covering them. I'm only mentioning this one because it doesn't seem like a bug fix at first glance. Next up, Armored Core has received massively increased shielding from +40 to +60 at Diamond tier. The other tiers are the same. And this has happened to 3 of Dooley's cores where late game they started to fall off pretty hard. So they've been giving increased diamond scaling to try to counteract that. I like that change a lot, to be honest. Although I do look at the numbers and feel fear, I don't think that's a bad thing. You should probably be afraid of Dooley's cores if he's running them in the late game. You shouldn't breathe a sigh of relief when you realize he's not a top-end power drill build. Next up, something I'm very happy to see is Brick Buddy down to 5 seconds. Brick Buddy has been the poster child of me pointing at Shield Dooley and saying this entire archetype is shit, please help. So it going down to 5 seconds is a greatly needed buff. That said, even at 5 seconds, not convinced it's actually strong, but it's a step in the right direction. Cybersecurity I'm a little bit scared by. I would say that cybersecurity was a niche card that was not widely usable, but in its niche, it was as powerful or more than the average build. So now in that niche, which always took it to Diamond tier anyway, it's got 20% less cooldown, and that's quite scary. It also happens to time out exactly with the Diamond battery to go off every 4 seconds, which is, again, horrifying. Now, that said, I don't know that this makes cybersecurity broken. I have no idea what the average cybersecurity build looks like due to survivorship bias, so I'm not against this change, but I do look at it and see a little bit of fear. Next up, Forklift enchants have been reworked. Its rework didn't include all enchants, so those needed changes as of last patch. They're just coming in late. Hacksaw has been buffed. Now it can destroy medium items, not just small items, which is very good because sometimes it would just fail to trigger. But more importantly, even if it did always trigger, it wouldn't be a great item, so now it gains the following text. When you destroy an item during combat, double this item's damage for the fight. Considering its base damage is 25 to 50, you need a whole hell of a lot of buffs for this to actually do anything. Now that said, because it is a 7-second item, you can reliably expect something like a weaponized core to buff it a little bit before it goes off, but again, this really isn't a huge deal. Additionally, based on text order, it looks to me like Hacksaw deals its damage before it doubles the damage, so it being doubled at 14 seconds in is not really a late game plan, and I'm not really expecting this to make a splash. This is a needed buff because Hacksaw was terrible, but it doesn't make Hacksaw good. Next up, Burn Core did fall off in the late game. I don't know that I fell off enough for me to really feel too bad for it, considering how much of a menace it can be in the mid game. But now it has up from 6 to 8 burn scaling at Diamond, so it is so much stronger at Diamond. After that, we have a fairly major rework for Kinetic Cannon. First of all, it scales down its cooldown with tier, just automatically. That's massive. The difference in 7 to 9 seconds is basically an eternity. That makes it much more usable in the late game, especially in fights where you're going to need to have it fire a second time, because the difference in 14 and 18 is just, like, come on, are you really expecting to live 18 seconds on day 13? Let's be real here. So that is a massively needed buff just for Kinetic Cannon to function. However, it also gains the following text. No longer do small items only scale it, now they also charge the core 1 second. So I can see some really crazy builds where you have like a diamond Kinetic Cannon and a diamond to the core and 5 small items between them that create some sort of really, really fast loop. Do I think that's going to be the best thing you can do as Dooley? No. But for the first time in the history of the game, I think Kinetic Cannon might actually be an okay item. Next up for Nitrogen Hammer, it's getting a tier adjustment buff going down from gold to silver tier. And where it previously froze one item for 1 to 2 seconds, now it always just freezes one item, which is a slight nerf. Its scaling at higher tiers remains the same, 50 at silver. And I actually like this change a lot, even if it is a slight nerf to an underplayed card. The issue with Nitrogen Hammer in my experience had always been that when I saw Nitrogen Hammer and thought, yes, I can capitalize on this, it was a symptom of me being a fully set up drill build, right? I would have like a drill with a really fast blue beetle and all the bugs, or I'd have a drill with the fiber optics and a coolant on the right side of my board. And these things that generated tons of freeze already froze my opponent a lot and killed them, making Nitrogen Hammer unnecessary. Lowering it to silver tier gives you the ability to access Nitrogen Hammer before you fully assemble a drill build, and makes it possible to play this sort of freeze Nitrogen Hammer Dooley that otherwise never was really available in organic gameplay. It was something you'd have to go out of your way to force. So I like this change a lot. It's not like a clear buff to Dooley. There's a very real argument that seeing more Nitrogen Hammers makes Dooley weaker, but it's also a necessary change for Nitrogen Hammer's design to function because it is a build-around card that was not available early enough in the game. Next up, Plasma Rifle is also getting a major buff. I know it doesn't look like it at first. Its cooldown's going up from 9 to 10, and its damage scaling is going down by 20% at every tier. However, now when you burn, instead of just scaling the damage, it charges this 1 second. I think everyone's going to fight Shock Trooper and get wrecked by this at least once on the new patch. I don't know how strong Plasma Rifle will be as a build, but I strongly suspect you can go 10 wins with the new Plasma Rifle. This is a much, much better card than it used to be. Next up, the Railgun now has tier scaling cooldown. Frankly, I think that's a good change. It was an early to mid-game power spike item that fell off really hard. Making its cooldown scales with tier sort of levels that out a bit. I still think it's probably going to be very, very strong at gold and fall off pretty hard at diamond. I don't think this quite solves the problem, but it certainly helps it with it a little bit. Like Brick Buddy, Wallace is also getting a second shaved off of its cooldown from 7 to 6. And like Brick Buddy, it was a bad shield item that didn't do its job and needed a lower cooldown. I still don't think Wallace is good, but it's certainly a lot better. There were so many times where I played Dooley, tried to assemble the early shield board, and then just died to Weapon Vanessa before any of my shield items scaled any meaningful amount or even went off a second time. These items needed help. They probably still need help, but they're certainly a lot better than they were. And last but certainly not least, Diamond Weaponized Core now is 60 damage scaling up from 40, which is a whole hell of a lot more. Moving on from Dooley, we come to the Mac items. Adrenal Converter is taking a nerf of 1 second to its haste duration, which is half of it, and frankly, it needed it. This item's great in its current state. It was insane previously. It did not need this full 2-second haste duration. Barbed Claws at 5 seconds multicast 3 was previously one of the fastest items in the game. Now it's down to 6 seconds cooldown, which effectively puts it at the same speed as an Uzi. It's still incredibly fast. It's just a little bit less broken. Basilisk Fang is getting the relic tag, makes sense to me considering Fossilized Femur is one as well. And Peace Rod is getting some much needed nerfs. It is 1 second slower at every tier, but that's not a huge nerf, and frankly that to me implies they want Peace Rod to be a very strong item. They don't want to nerf it too much. The much bigger change, but I think an objectively good change for the health of the game, is that it no longer generates chunks of lead at all. It's back to its previous effect with the additional line of text, when you destroy an item, gain 2, 4, 6, 8 gold, so, tier dependent gold. Whenever you destroy an item, it's essentially the same as selling it if it were a small item. This does 2 things. First, it massively levels out how good Peace Rod is. It's no longer conditional on finding other pieces, and like most specifically potion distillery, to actually make the scaling work by turning all the lead into something else and getting your chunks of gold. So as a result of that, it's massively reducing the variance of how much economy piece roll actually represents, which I think is a good thing. You shouldn't have some piece rollouts that just give you a bunch of lead you can't use, and then some that give you infinite money. But the second thing this is doing, which I think is the more important reason, is that it doesn't just generate like up to 4 chunk of lead transformations a day on its own, which is insane scaling for stuff like Calcinator, Philosopher's Stone, etc. That was too many transmutes. The system wasn't meant for that. So this needed to be divorced from that. Also, it destroys the item properly now, so flavor when we're moving back in the correct direction. I appreciate that destroying only weapons is too niche and it needs to destroy anything, but I also appreciate that flavor-wise, while it might be showing a sword, let's be real, basically every item in the Bazaar is meant for violence, especially max items. So thematically, I think the card's better off. Balance-wise, I think it needed the cooldown nerf. Economically, I think it's functional without being a powerhouse now, and it doesn't break any other cards. I think this is just great changes our piece roll. I still think it's quite powerful, but it's not as broken as it was. Next up, Recycling Bin has much more regen at every tier, going from 234 to 369. I still don't like Recycling Bin, just the nature of transform randomly during combat is awful to me, but it's certainly a lot better than it was. Shroud of Obsidian's going down from 4 to 5 seconds. It was just a very fast lifesteal weapon and was probably too powerful. It was certainly the most powerful reagent and it needed to be nerfed to some degree. I think that's a great change. Sifting Pan gained the regen tag, it just needed that. And probably my saddest nerf of the patch, I'm not happy about this one, Staff of the Moose. It's going down from silver to gold tier, and that makes it much harder to find. The same reason I'm hyped to see the Nitrogen Hammer get nerfed, or sorry, buffed to silver tier, I'm very sad to see Staff of the Moose get nerfed to gold tier, because there are a lot of builds that are generating regen and trying to turn it into damage and win with it. And Staff of the Moose is the build around item that enables that specifically. There are not very many replacements for what Staff of the Moose does. Realistically, the replacements are like an obsidian enchant on the regen item itself, yeah? There's not a lot you can do to replicate Staff of the Moose. So seeing this get tier adjusted is not a change I like. I would much rather see it be balanced at silver tier than pushed to gold tier. The actual nerf itself isn't a huge deal. It has half a second less invincibility duration at gold tier. It has 25 less regen at both of its higher tiers. Obviously, that makes the card worse. But the most important part of Staff of the Moose always has been and always will be its regeneration passive effect, or weapons at plus damage equal to your regen, and locking that behind gold tier, making it that much less consistent defined, I think really hurts all the Mac builds that care about this in a way that I don't find. I guess how I would describe it is that consistency is not balance. Making something less consistent will make it rarer, but it will not affect its power level. So making it less consistent simply makes the game more random is kind of how I feel about it. I think items that you are meant to build around should not be items that are hard to find. As a great example of this, I think the game is strictly better off for Crow's Nest being a bronze item. I think that common items should be build around items, and build around items should not be rare items. So I really do not like seeing this tier adjustment, even though I fully appreciate with stuff like Peace Roll and Self-Poison Regeneration that Staff of the Moose was kind of out of control last patch. I still don't like seeing the tier adjustment due to the nature of the card. Next up, we have Test Subject Alpha. Its cooldown is 1 second lower at all tiers. Frankly, it needed it. And then additionally, its poison scaling is 50% higher. Test Subject Alpha is still probably not like a crazy broken card, but it's certainly a much better card than it was previously, especially at Diamond tier, because 1 second off of the cooldown is more important when that's 1/6 of its cooldown and not 1/10 of its cooldown. I would say that Test Subject Alpha is definitely a card you can go 10 wins with and was a card deserving of this buff because it was kind of hard to make it go 10 wins. It's in a better spot now, but I still don't think it's like a crazy powerful broken card in any capacity. And you can go 10 wins with it was certainly my opinion of the old Vial Launcher. We're like, yeah, you can go 10 wins with any remotely good card, but Vial Launcher wasn't great. Its scaling has been massively increased from 10, 15, 20 up to 15, 30, 45, somewhere between 50 and 125% at every tier. Or sorry, that's the base damage. The scaling damage is the exact same though. They're the same numbers. This thing is tremendously better than it was. And while I've never played a Vial Launcher build to any degree of success, I've seen a couple other people manage it. This is a much more real card, and I'm going to be very tempted to try out Vial Launcher on this patch. Which brings us to Pig's items. And this is the last major head scratcher of the patch for me. I don't really get this one. Atlas Stone is no longer a diamond item, it's a bronze item. Instead of being a flat 6-second cooldown, it now scales down to 6 seconds starting at 9. Atlas Stone is an awful item, and its only redeeming factor was that it was only a diamond item, so you didn't have to see it very often. But now it's going to show up everywhere. So I view this as an explicit pig nerf, but it's like the least fun, most boring, most frustrating kind of way to nerf a character, to the point that I think they originally were planning a different rework and that one didn't make it, and this is like a leftover change. I don't know why we did this. Atlas Stone is just an awful card. Being available at lower tiers and less effectiveness isn't going to make it good. Now, I will acknowledge that in the early to mid game, it's more likely that your opponent lives for like 20 seconds and you're using like a showcase and you hit them twice and you double the first bit of scaling you do. And it's like maybe kind of okay on days 4 to 7. I don't really believe that. I think it's more playable than it used to be because you had to be in some sort of Disneyland nonsense scenario to even consider buying it in the first place. But it's still just an awful item, and seeing it in stores all the time is going to be very frustrating for Pig now because it's not really good at anything. Next up, in the never-ending series of Beehive changes, Beehive now does more scaling than it used to, at least at higher tiers. And sure, I guess that makes sense to me. If you have less bees, you want to scale them more, and it did fall off a cliff because you don't have as many bees as you used to, even assuming you find all 3 tiers of Beehive, going from silver to gold to diamond and getting all 6 maximum possible bees. I don't know. I think the current design is in need of changes beyond scaling adjustments. I don't think this is going to fix the problem with Beehive. I don't think it's an easily fixable design. It's a very problematic design as shown by how constantly it gets changed. Next up, we have the Giant Ice Club, which is getting nerfed. It has a 2-second faster base cooldown, which does help it in some ways. However, its charge duration has changed from 3 seconds to 2 seconds. So rather than going off every 4 seconds, it goes off, or sorry, every 4 freezes, it goes off every 5 freezes, which is a fairly massive reduction in effectiveness. Additionally, if you were to do something like put it next to a phonograph or a fort, those would be less effective than they used to because of the intervals for freezes, right? If you put it next to a phonograph, previously it goes from 12 to 6, goes off in 2 freezes. Now it goes from 10 to 5, goes off in 2.5, that are known as 3 freezes. I do think this is a good change, but while I'm talking about Giant Ice Club changes, I do want to mention that the first time you fall below half health each fight, freeze 1 item for 99 seconds is probably the worst line of text in the entire game, and I still don't know why that exists. It is not thematically sensible. It's not a good source of power, right? It's like a very random, volatile source of power that feels terrible for everyone involved, and if it is a source of power the card needs, then just remove it and give it power through literally any other mechanism, right? This mechanism for it, like, I don't understand. I've never understood this text. I inherently dislike counter matchup cards, and because this affects your opponent freezes, it sort of is one, so I've never really liked Giant Ice Club as a design. But the random permanent freeze at half health, I think, is just the worst design text in the entire game, and I do not know why it exists. And if we're going to balance Giant Ice Club, I feel the need to vent about that. Next up, Halati is getting nerfed. It's a 1 second slower cooldown at all tiers. And while I kind of get it, usually when a card gets reworked, it's not strictly a nerf. For those who have forgotten, Halati now deals flat 5 with scaling cooldown. It previously had scaling damage and was 6 at every tier. And at this point with the nerfs, I would just say it's straight up vastly worse than the old Halati before the reworks. And maybe it's meant as like a rework nerf so it's less broken with all the new weapon scaling stuff. But it still leaves me scratching my head a bit. I don't know if that's the intention. If it is, it still feels weird to see it reworked into a worse card. Next up, Pygmalien Drum is taking a much needed scaling nerf down from 5, 10, 15 to 3, 6, 9. It's still going to be a great card. It's just less insane than it used to be. Speaking of still a great card, Ring King Gauntlets are getting knocked from 5 to 6 seconds. They were easily Pig's best early weapon, and still a great weapon for Pig at every point throughout the game. I would say across the board, maybe they were Pig's best weapon. Sure, they weren't doing the broken things like at Ladle and Yo-Yo, but in terms of just bread and butter weapon to throw into any weapon build, I think Ring King Gauntlet was always right there, one of your top contenders. And even at 6 seconds, that exact same sentence is going to be true. It needed the nerf. Speaking of needing the nerf, Showcase is losing scaling, but not much. Only 5 per tier and a none at Diamond. And not like additively, it's just 5 flat, 20 to 15, 30 to 25, 40 to 35, right? This is a very minor nerf, which I think shows us, just like with Peace Wrought, that Showcase is meant to be a very powerful card. They know it's too powerful, especially early, but they don't want to rein it in much because it's meant to be a powerful build-around card. Rest in peace, Moose Staff, by the way. So I like this change, obviously. It was too strong, needed to go down in power. I also really like the snowmobile changes. It now has scaling cooldown with tier, not really a big deal. I would actually say that going from 7 seconds to 8 to 6 is a nerf. The reason for that is you're going to find the card most often at its lowest tier, and if you're pushing it to diamond now when you otherwise wouldn't have, that's at the opportunity cost of upgrading something else. I would say that generally this cooldown change is not a buff, but its charge mechanic change is absolutely a buff. Previously it was when this gains haste, now it is when you haste. The rest of it's just a minor wording change. But the difference in when this gains haste and when you gain haste, especially for Pig, is massive. Pig does not have good haste generation. Essentially, the only good way to haste for Snowmobile was Pygmalien Drum specifically, but that hasted your whole board very effectively and Snowmobile very poorly. Now, with Pygmalien Drum, Snowmobile becomes incredibly fast and is actually a good playable weapon in that niche. Obviously, it's still not a great generic card because Pig doesn't have good access to any sort of haste, and then outside of that, freeze builds generally don't want to deal a tiny bit of damage. So it's still mostly a niche weapon, but now that niche exists with Pygmalien Drum where it previously kind of just didn't. Which brings us to the small handful of changes Vanessa's getting. I'm still quite worried about Weapon Vanessa, considering how much less health we're going to have in the late game with the experience changes. And there are no changes here to speak of. I do like 2 of the changes quite a lot. Mr. Richardson, the monkey, is now aquatic. You see, he's on a boat. Unlike this bird that's on the boat, he has wings, he can leave whenever he wants. Not actually aquatic, that's airborne. I don't know why Mr. Richardson is aquatic. This should be reverted immediately. If being on a boat is all it takes to be aquatic, please apply the tag to Vanessa's entire card pool. Okay, thanks. This is just wrong. I don't know what happens. It is in the official notes. If it slipped through the entire process with no one stopping it. I don't know why this happened. I'm just deeply confused by this. Anyway, moving on. Pesky Pete's getting a massive buff. It previously gained 4 or 8 burn depending on tier for adjacent friends and property. Now those give it 1 multicast. As a 7-second multicast 3 item, that's just small volcanic vents. It's not aquatic, so it is worse in some ways, but it is a friend, so it's better in some ways. I would say that Pesky Pete is actually a good item now. I don't think that Pesky Pete's like a crazy item at all. I think generally the builds that will want a Pesky Pete don't need him, and being at Gold Plus, you're not going to see him that often anyway. But previously, you would only ever run Pesky Pete for like specific tag criteria when you were trying to have a non-aquatic friend with a flagship or something, right? People will actually consider running Pesky Pete for its effects now, which they didn't before. Do I think it's a crazy card? No, but I think it's a good enough card to deserve a spot on some boards, and that's a much needed step in the right direction. And last item change of the day, Water Wheel is going down from 10 to 8 seconds to 8 to 6 seconds, just 2-second reduction across the board. And considering anytime you use an adjacent item, charge 2 seconds, this is going to greatly speed up your startup time by just going off the first time you use 2 items, basically. But additionally, it's going to give you so many more haste procs as it goes off over and over much faster now. And that's going to help stuff like Pufferfish and Shark Ray quite a lot. I really like both of these changes. They're both fairly important, impactful buffs that have nothing to do with Weapon Vanessa or Tortuga, which are by far the best builds available to Vanessa, but we do have 2 changes left with skill changes from monster skills. Into the Void is now the first time you use an item as opposed to start a fight, which means Void Golem is actually beatable. His first item goes off 7 seconds into a fight, and there are tons of builds that can kill him in under 7 seconds, where they've just scaled enough over the course of the game to do that, and tons of builds where if your items exist for 7 seconds, then sure, you have important items, but they've all done their job. They've started dealing poison. They've started scaling up your other stuff. Even if they get destroyed, you have a chance of winning. Additionally, this also means that for the first 7 seconds of the fight, the Void Golem's Caltrops deal 1 damage, not 201 damage, which is a fairly massive difference. I think Void Golem's still going to be terrifying, but he's definitely beatable by a lot more builds than he used to be, and this is a very good change in that regard. As for if a player gets it, this should obviously be the first time you use an item and not start a fight, just like any other monster skill or skill in the game at this point. So yeah, great change, love this. Additionally, small refresh used to be infinite anytime you use a small item heal. Now it's the first 5 to 20 times depending on tier. That's just how everything else in the game works. That's how it should have worked from the start. Glad to see it. On the whole, I love this patch. There are a couple of things that leave me scratching my head. Aquatic Mr. Richardson, Bronze Atlas Stone. I'm not scratching my head about the tier nerf on Moose Staff. I get it. It was a problematically powerful card with all the new regen stuff. but I do want to see it go back to silver when they can balance it in the future, because it is a build around card that should not be locked behind high tiers. But on the whole, the vast majority of changes in this patch, Water Wheel, Pesky Pete, Snowmobile, so many well-deserved nerfs, the Vial Launcher buff, like all of the balance changes throughout this patch, I think were fantastic, except for like a very small handful that ultimately aren't a big deal in the first place. So yeah, I think this is a great patch. And despite liking the balance changes and all the stuff on how Bazaar, the items and skills, by far the biggest change we're going to be seeing, the one that's hardest to understand just looking at the patch notes, and the most impactful, is the experience route we're looking at here. You will always be fighting day 1 with 4 board slots, day 2 with 6, day 3 with 8. You will not be getting ahead of that anymore because they've moved all of the bonus experience past day 3. Additionally, in the late game, you are never going to be anywhere near as high level as you got to. Previously, we would see people breaking level 20 on day 16. I don't think that'll ever happen again without experience changes. And the more I've thought about them, the more I've grown to love these changes. This is actually the second time I recorded this video because my new computer changed OBS to use the default mic again, even though I've already set it to use the mic that's actually a microphone. And the first time I recorded this video, I was much more conflicted about these experience changes. But just in the limited time I've had to think about it and let it grow on me, I really think this is a massively beneficial change for the new player experience, and that experience min-maxing is probably the least interesting form of min-maxing. We should see more stuff like this tiny furry monster change and less stuff like gain 1 experience, which I think is the least interesting good thing to click in the game. Anyways, that'll be all for now. If you made it this far, then thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. If you want more daily content like this, I swear it'll be daily content again soon. I'm so sorry about my upload schedule. But theoretically, if I do start uploading daily again, you should subscribe so that you don't miss it. And if you could leave a like, it really does help the channel grow. It boosts the video up and the algorithm helps it spread around. And I really cannot overstate how much I do appreciate it. Anyways, that'll be all for now. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.